Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is the Ukraine War News Update for the 4th of September 2023. It's the first part thereof. Let's get on with it. It's back to normal for me. The kids are at school and I am on schedule. Okay, so let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Check the description below. 460 personnel lost yesterday for the Russians. That is less than we've seen for the last few days. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on the front line. It's all about what story does this tell us. And there's just not a lot of news coming out of the front line. So my segment for the front line might be a little bit shorter today. And the question for me is, what does that tell me? Or tell us? When you are not hearing a great deal of news from the front line, is that good news for the Ukrainians or bad news? And I think that's probably indicative that they are finding it more difficult at the moment, and they should do, because they are at the most difficult position, which is the most difficult Russian defensive positions. Yeah, yes, they're the minefields, the dense minefields they've had to fight through, and that's been painstaking. But now they are at the trenches, as far as I can work out, that second line of defence. So the first line being all those smaller trench lines and dugouts and minefields that they negotiated, and now they're at that major, tank ditch and then manned trench line. So I think that could be why we have seen a lack of information, because they're probably just grinding away at those trenches. I could be wrong. 4 tanks is many tanks fewer than we've seen over the last few days. We've seen some extraordinary numbers in terms of tanks. APVs at 14. That's a loss for the Russians, of course. You know, they are losing significant numbers of these consistently every single day. 29 artillery systems is going back to crazy levels again. I mean, we've seen this last week has been a real challenge for the Russians. They have had such high attrition rates of their artillery. Is it making a significant difference to their capability in being able to defend their positions? I don't know. I guess we shall see. There are still these claims that they are not able to deliver counter-battery fire with any great effectiveness. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, that's fairly useful for the Ukrainians. As you can see, there's about, one up to between 1 and 1.5 lost a day on average over the course of the year. So 2 is a pretty good haul for the day. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, not sure what system that is, to be honest. We'll see if we can find it in the list in a second. 37 drones. That's not from last night, but the night before. It might have some from last night, but I think that's mainly the night before. We've had 2 nights in a row, or not we, the Ukrainians have had 2 nights in a row of significant Russian Shahed drone attacks, particularly in the south near on the Danube River. 1 boat here, and there's footage of that. 47 vehicles and fuel tanks. And bear in mind, yesterday was 59. This is an obscenely large number of vehicles lost over a 2-day. Well, really over the last week or so. The Russians are really having their logistics lines and capabilities hammered by the Ukrainians. 6 pieces of special equipment is also pretty significant. That could be anything from electronic warfare to deminers and excavators to intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Now let's look add a little more depth into the sorts of equipment that was lost. Well, when we look at Oryx's data for the 3rd, so this is 24 hours worth of data, because I think he's now doing it on a daily basis. He was doing it on a 48-hour basis. You can see that, not a lot reported yesterday. 1 Ukrainian piece of equipment lost. That's a Bradley. Day before there was 14. I think I reported that to you on that day. Is that correct? Anyway, yesterday 7 pieces of Russian equipment lost. So that's a ratio of 7-1. But then the day before it was sort of parity. And if you remember yesterday, I talked about Andrew Perpetua's figures and said that actually yesterday they showed parity as well. So anyway, let's have a look at the sort of things that were destroyed yesterday, or at least not necessarily destroyed yesterday, but the video image or the photographic imagery was analysed yesterday. I mean, with Oryx, some of these could have been destroyed last February, right? So we just don't know. Anyway, as I say, 1 Bradley, and the Russians lost, they've added one of the aircraft from the Sukhov raid. So it's people are analysing satellite imagery to work out exactly what was destroyed. I think the latest is definitely at least 5 aircraft were badly damaged. There was talk about how if they were using some of these cardboard drones, and there's been some video footage of them being tested using forms of kind of cluster munition type airburst explosives. And if you use them on top of a plane, they would a bit like the tungsten ball bearings from some of the HIMARS ordnance. They would cause a lot of holes to be put in the planes, but you wouldn't see that from satellite imagery. So there are some claims that actually you don't know how much damage has been done to these planes, because some of them might have exploded and caught fire. Okay, you can see that easily, but some of them might just have tiny little holes all over them that you wouldn't be able to see from satellite imagery. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one out there. Here you've got a TOS-1, which is good for the Ukrainians to see one of those destroyed. They are the thermobaric munitions or thermobaric weapons, and then a couple of tanks and whatnot. So there you go, and a small patrol boat that we're going to see in a second. So Andrew Perpetua's done his own list, and it kind of does look again like the Ukrainians are having the better of the ratios. He's seen that boat, some tanks, IFV trucks, a lot of trucks here, which you'd expect if yesterday's 59 and today 40 odd trucks and other equipment was destroyed. You'd expect to have quite a few pieces of visual evidence of that. And then for the Ukrainians, just a normal kind of spread. The tanks that were destroyed here, so 4 tanks, T-64, T-72, T-72, don't know what the other one is. So that's, again, not your newest tanks, which is good news, I think, for the Ukrainians. So that's, Grad as well. That's your multiple launch rocket system, one of the two. Anyway, there we go. That's what Andrew Perpetua has found. Now, this bit of footage, I'm not going to show it just in case I get hammered, but all the links are in the description below, so you can go and check them out for these 2 segments. Now, this is interesting for several reasons. One, that Bayraktars are coming back, it appears. So I've got 2 bits of footage on Bayraktars. So up to 20 Bayraktar TB2s are still actively serving Ukraine as long-range reconnaissance assets. Now, I don't know whether the Bayraktar here is carrying the munition as well and firing at this, or whether it's spotting for something else firing at this. But they have been used, particularly in the south. So if we have a look at the map, we know that the Bayraktars mainly seem to be operational over the sea, and also, around here, around the sort of Kimburn, coming down to here. We saw the other day that what's it called? I forget the name of the island, but that's the name of the island. That Jaroliach Island. It's not actually an island. It looks to be an isthmus joined by a sandbar. Now, the training accumulations of Russian troops training here and equipment in several places. There were 5 hits along here by HIMARS, and they did significant damage to personnel and equipment. And they seem to be spotted by Bayraktars as well. So I think the Bayraktars are really active in this coastal area around here, and that's what would be evidenced by this, which is a strike against a boat. As I said, I don't know whether the strike was from the drone or something else. They've been once again been employed for strike missions over Kherson Oblast. After time absent, the Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 unmanned drone is back. A Russian KS-701 patrol boat unloading equipment was destroyed by the TB2 strike, reportedly in the northwestern part of the Black Sea. So these guys are unloading the boat, as you can see, just here, and then the boat takes a direct hit, that it's a boat no more, or at least that it's, as you can see, unfortunately, it is leaking oil everywhere. That's the ramifications of the explosion. I don't know how much of the equipment was damaged in that, but yeah, that's done its job, that munition. Right, already the second Bayraktar TB2 drone today. Seems like Ukraine has new toys to play with. A Russian Ural vehicle was struck in the southern direction. Now, you remember the beginning of the war? I mean, we're going back to February, March, April last year, when the Russians had all of those convoys, that 60-mile convoy or whatever it was northeast of Kyiv, and other convoys around in places. We had the Bayraktars doing an immense amount of damage to those. That gave the Bayraktar, I mean, a song was made about them. It gave this mythical kind of characteristic. However, the Ukrainians were very clever with the footage they released of the Bayraktars. So actually, they did a lot of damage initially, and then the Russians were able to adapt to the Bayraktars, and I think they did shoot a number of them down. But what the Ukrainians did is they released the footage that they recorded pretty much all at the beginning, and they released that over time to signify that the Bayraktars were this continual threat to the Russians, where actually there'd been a threat all in kind of one time, time period. And yeah, they were just clever with the way that they released the footage. Anyway, moving on. So the Bayraktars seem to be back on the menu. What does American aid to Ukraine look like, says this source? It stops reinforcements in their tracks south of Lvov. Russians try to bring up fresh men and equipment to slow down the Ukrainian advance. First, they're hit by regular high explosive rounds, and then the 44th Artillery Brigade adjusts with the data to use cluster munitions. Here we have a convoy. It's mainly this front one was hit, and I don't know if there's one near the back ends up smoking. But if we look towards the end, it seems to be mainly that front one that was hit. But you can see the cluster munitions there being used after high explosive rounds. Now, even though things aren't smoking here, you don't know the amount of damage from shrapnel. But it's certainly that one at the front of the convoy was destroyed. I always wonder why, like if I was driving these vehicles, it appears that the protocol, the doctrine is, if you start getting strikes like this, get out the vehicle and run away as quickly as possible, rather than do a UE and drive the heck out of there. Now, I don't understand that. There's so many times where I've seen vehicles just sit there and they might not get hit first time, but then like 10 minutes later, they get hit by subsequent munitions. And I don't understand why they don't just do a runner. But it seems to be doctrine to... Evidently, the assumption would be that there's a greater survivability of people if you just run away and leave the equipment to get hammered. And maybe, what you would assume that people therefore are more important than the equipment, as you would think. And but correct me if I'm wrong. Right, Ukrainians use artillery twice as much as Russians in the south. I found this. I mean, we've heard similar claims to this, particularly in the south, where the Ukrainians are on a counteroffensive, and we've heard from Russians yesterday. Actually, I reported to you that they say that they are using artillery without, thinking about they're not using it economically. They're using it freely, and I believe that they probably stockpiled a lot of artillery ammunition leading up to the counteroffensive, which is why they had a shortage of ammunition for a long time. They were probably gearing up for this so that they could use a lot during this and use it freely and therefore more effectively. So Ukrainians are using artillery twice as much as the Russians in the south. Commander Tarnavsky reported that Russians attacked Ukrainian positions 16 times in the past day in the Tari direction and carried out 688 shellings and 19 airstrikes. Artillery units of the Defense Forces of the Tari direction performed 1,328 fire missions during the day. Over the last day, the loss of the enemy amounted to 249 people, 20 units of enemy equipment were destroyed, and 2 enemy ammunition depots were also destroyed. So that's in the sort of southern area. Of course, that's the claims of the Ukrainians themselves. Take that with a pinch of salt, I'm sure. The Russian MOD claimed that at night, in the northwestern part of the Black Sea, aircraft of the Black Sea Fleet destroyed 4 US-made Willard Sea Force high-speed military boats with landing groups of the armed forces of Ukraine heading towards Cape Tarkankut on the Crimean coast. Now, I can't speak to the accuracy of this. It's certainly plausible. So we know the Ukrainians are or have been involved in activities all around this area. So Snake Island there it leads to some gas platforms here, and I think here. So these are staging posts, and they're also places where both sides actually can place, if they can get control of them, can place ISR equipment, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance equipment, so radars and what have you. That gives them an advantage in this whole area. And they can also be used as staging posts for amphibious attacks on the Crimean or the Western Crimean Cape here. We saw a successful attack on Mayak some time back, a week or so ago, and there have been some subsequent claims from Rebar, from Russian sources, and again here we have the MOD, that they have foiled further attacks, and that could well be true, and of course the Ukrainians won't be shouting about that. So it might be that Ukrainians lost some boats, or it might be over-egged. It could be a repelled attack that's then been sort of over-egged by the Russians, and to the point that the Ukrainians lost 4 boats instead of having them repelled, or it could be that they have indeed, say, lost 4 boats. So who knows? But that's a claim of the Russians there. And here in Moscow, another warehouse up in flames yesterday. Paint and varnish. There's been quite a lot of paint and varnish warehouses. This seems to be a common occurrence. Who would want to be a paint manufacturer or distributor in Russia these days? And of course, the one that I reported yesterday, but not in my main first news piece, so I just thought I'd say this again. St. Petersburg large oil depot was on fire there, with significant damage done. So there are still these fires that are taking place at an alarmingly regular basis for the Russians. Right, let's move on to distant strikes. And the first thing to say is the Ukrainians have been on the receiving end of yet another swarm of Shahed drones. Another attack has taken place last night. And again, it's Odessa area that has borne the brunt of the attacks. But also Dnipropetrovsk was also targeted. So that's to say that... well, Odessa's up here, but actually I think it's mainly the Danube River area. So you've got Ishmael and you've got Reni. Reni was hit the night before, and it appears that there have been more targets taken there, and then Dnipropetrovsk up here. Right. So, yeah, it's thought that Russia took delivery of new drones from Iran only last week, just in time for this. So, whereas last night, the night before, the interception rate was very good. Only 3 got through. Last night, 23 out of 32. So that leaves 9 drones to get through rather than 3 drones. And of course, that can do quite a lot of damage. So what do we see? Well, massive drone attack, largely focused on the ports of the River Danube again, especially Izmail. Warehouses, production building, agricultural equipment, and industrial enterprises will damage in 2 communities. No casualties reported, but this will be significantly damaging for the Ukrainian economy, for the export of the grain, and for the world food supplies. I mean, it's absolutely awful. Of course, I don't need to say that again. It's, you know, the Russians targeting food supply for the world is not a good look. But yeah, Izmail, this port on the Danube, being hit, I think this is a huge challenge, and the Ukrainians will need some significant air defences, I think, put in place here, such as your Gepards, to take out those Shahed drones. It's probably, I think this is probably quite clever from the Russians in terms of, that it's laden with that's a big value judgment, and it's horrific, right? Targeting these kind of enterprises, food for the world, etc., etc. But from a kind of strategic point of view from Russia, they've spent all this time hitting places, from Kiev to Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, Kharkiv, Khmelnytsky, so on and so forth, that they need to find places where they can hit, because Ukraine doesn't have the air defense systems put in place. So if you don't hit, and then suddenly find that actually, because you've got the blockade on, that they're starting to do grain exports inland through the use of the Danube River, then, oh my goodness, right, we can take out some targets here, and there won't be the air defences put in place because we haven't really hit that before. And then suddenly they are having some success with really hammering the Ukrainians there. Now, there is talk that this could be ahead of Turkey going to, or Erdogan going to have a meeting with Putin in Russia, because Putin doesn't really want to leave Russia. He's been reticent to do that, even when he can. He's saying it's not going to the G20 in India. I think it is, even though that they're not signatories to the Rome Statute and the International Criminal Court. So he wouldn't be arrested, but he's not going there. And Erdogan is going to Putin rather than Putin coming to Erdogan. But they're going to talk about the grain deal. So there's this theory that actually that he's trying to hammer Ukrainian grain export capability as much as he possibly can before the grain deal may come back online. Right, so that's why you're seeing this. And two nights in a row, really heavy attacks on that infrastructure. Okay, a fire broke out in Kursk yesterday or last night. Kursk region after the explosions. That's in Russia. Video from local social networks. What was this about? Well, it's 4 kilometers from the nuclear power plant there. I don't know whether that's the actual target. I doubt it from the Ukrainians because that wouldn't be a good move for them. A Russian air defense shot down the drone. A fire can be seen in the place where the debris fell. And explosions are heard in the Kursk region. Local channels report about 5 explosions in the area of Kurchatov settlement. Again, don't know what the targets were there, but activity in Russia with Ukrainian drones. Right. Moving on to other bits and pieces now. I do like this quote here. We're not winning in Ukraine because they have American weapons, says the Russian. I've seen this so many times, and I've seen this with Russian propagandists, like, oh, we could take out NATO, we could take out the US. The bravado, the big Russian bear that we've seen over decades, and going back to the Cold War. Yeah, we're better. No, we're better. No, we're better. And the Americans and the Russians were trumping their own, capabilities. But reality appears to be that Russia is a bit of a paper army. My body's saying I needed more tea there. So, we're in this situation now where I think we're understanding that Russia has been, probably for a very long time, a bit of a paper army, paper bear. And you hear them complaining that they can't beat the Ukrainians, right, easily. They're supposed to be in Kyiv within 3 days. And a year and a half later, they're not in Kyiv. They've been beaten back to a long way back from Kyiv. So what do they say? Why is this? Oh, it's because of the American weapons they've been given. And then in another conversation, they'll be, oh yeah, we could take out America. We could take out the US. Like, dude, the US would make mincemeat out of you now. Like, I argue that the Polish army could defeat the Russian army now. Like, the Americans were just absolutely flattened. You've lost half of your attack helicopters. You've got your navy, okay, fair enough, but you lost your flagship vessel. And yeah, okay, the navy might be okay, but your army, your air force is somewhat. Your air force can't even get air superiority over Ukraine. You're not even the second greatest army in Ukraine. I mean, so I think this is just a great comment. It's not news, but I love it. I think it's spot on. Yeah, we'd defeat the USA, but we can't beat Ukraine because they've got American weapons. Zelensky announces the dismissal of Defense Minister Reznikov. Now, I reported this last night. This is obviously big news, and it hopefully won't have huge ramifications. But it is taking up a lot of the bandwidth in the information space at the moment. So what has happened? Well, Zelensky has announced the dismissal of Reznikov, but I think that has to go through the parliament. So that's, as it says here, Zelensky announces dismissal of Reznikov, the defense minister, adding that the decision will be put to the parliament in the coming week. Quote, I believe the ministry needs new approaches and other formats of interaction, both with the military and the society as a whole. Now, this is over Reznikov's overseeing of some corruption within the defense ministry procurement areas. So I don't know if you remember, probably going back to last year, where they have bought overpriced food and jackets and all sorts of stuff. I don't think it concerns your major acquisition of equipment, but more your peripherals and whatnot. And he was in charge, obviously, as defense minister, of the ministry when this was taking place. Now, he got through that somewhat unscathed, but it did get to a point where there was talk about him being dismissed some months back, but it didn't happen. And I was talking at the time where I think he just had too much utility for the Ukrainian government. He had done a fairly good job in these other aspects, other areas of procurement abroad with other defense ministers of other nations doing all the work to getting pieces of kit from the US, from European allies, from all these allies. And so it was possibly the case that Zelensky thought, I should get rid of him, but I can't get rid of him at the moment because actually it would cost us more than it's worth doing. So he made that calculation at the time. But I think the writing was on the wall that at some point, once it may be the airframes, once the F-16s have been secured and that's all been sorted out, that once Reznikov has done his job there, then we'll move him on. So the theory was, or the rumours were, that he's going to become the UK diplomat to the UK ambassador, Ukrainian ambassador to the UK. So there have now been rumours subsequently that the UK are not too happy with someone that's been involved with corruption becoming a UK ambassador. So that might not happen. But then we've had Reznikov sort of trying to get in there first before it goes to the Parliament. I guess he's submitting his letter of resignation, so he's maybe doesn't have that on his CV that he's been dismissed. I submitted my letter of resignation to Rushen Stefanchuk, chairman of the Parliament of Ukraine. It was an honour to serve the Ukrainian people and work for the Ukrainian army for the last 22 months, the toughest period of Ukraine's modern history. And he's going to be replaced by, and I think this is a really astute appointment, and I'll explain why, by Rustam Umarov, who was born in Uzbekistan in 1982. His family, like practically all Crimean Tatars, so he's a Crimean Tatar, were deported by the USSR to Uzbekistan in 1944. His family returned to Crimea in the late 1980s. He is the deputy head of the permanent delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. He is also an advisor to the former chairman of the Majis of the Crimean Tatar people, Mustafa Dzhemilev. He is a co-chair of the Crimean Platform Diplomatic Initiative. Okay, so he appears to be he appears to have good experience and have the skills for the job. So, I mean, I don't know enough about him, but I presume he's a good man for the job in terms of his what's the word? He merits the job, right? But also, he's a Crimean Tatar. Now we're in a situation. So this has two elements to it. We're in a situation where the Tatars are actually one of the biggest voices of dissent to the Russians in Crimea, and the Russians are persecuting the Tatars. So if they see this guy being made defense minister, then actually that's going to give them something to fight for, something to think that they are being represented. It's we want to keep the Tatars on side. So here is a representative in one of the most important positions in the Ukrainian government. But then you have Erdogan, right, who is a Muslim leader. Well, Turkey is technically a secular state because of Ataturk and post-Ottoman Empire, blah, blah, blah. But they have been kind of embracing Islam and that conservatism over the last sort of decade of Erdogan's rule. And so therefore, having this guy as defense minister, it could be a good play to doing work with Turkey and Erdogan's going to go over to Putin and meet him. And I don't know, I just think it's an interesting choice. And I think possibly a good choice for a couple of reasons. Anyway, let me know what you think. Right. As someone says here, guess Ukraine would be the first country in the world with a Jewish president and a Muslim defense minister. Wow. But, Zelensky, if you checked out speeches, I remember right at the beginning of doing all this stuff, probably still on my other channel when I was doing these videos on my Atypical Philosopher channel, I went through a bunch of speeches by Zelensky and talked about how it was language of unification. he was all about inclusion and bringing people together. His speeches are so good at doing that. And he is another example. I just think this sends the right message, as well as, being the right man for the job. So going on to something completely different now. Brace yourself, says Tatarigami, because Russians have once again showcased unparalleled innovation. What you are looking at is a satellite image. So this is looks like, I don't know if it's Sukhov, satellite image featuring a Tu-95 strategic bomber, probably not then, covered with car tires. According to them, this should protect strategic bombers from drones. They're literally covered in car tires. And you see the inset there of the tires on the wing. This doesn't seem to be just a single occurrence. In this satellite imagery, it seems the Russians are still in the process of fitting tires onto the bomber. A fresh budget-friendly version of ERA substitutes for the Russian Air Force, ? I mean, wow. So at least 2 of these bombers are being fitted out with these tires to stop them from being attacked by or being damaged by drones that might hit them. I mean, you might think, yeah, it's pretty good innovation. And it could well be indeed. I just love this quote from Artois. Having lived in Belfast for many years, I can confirm that stacks of car tyres are not particularly fire resistant. There is a non-zero chance Northern Irish Twitter finds this post and it descends into naked tribal warfare. I just absolutely love that. Yeah, anyone with an experience of places like that, I mean, South Africa and, tyres have long been used as flammable targets. So, yeah, I don't know how sensible that is, but nonetheless, that is what the Russians are doing. And the Air Force, Ukrainian Air Force, is preparing for possible Russian attacks on energy infrastructure. This has been in the information space now for a good week or so. A lot of people talking, some Western experts saying that get ready, there are going to be huge hits on Ukraine's energy infrastructure in the coming autumn and winter. Ukraine is strengthening its air defense to prepare for Russia's potential mass attacks on critical infrastructure facilities this autumn, says Yuri Ihnat, the Air Force spokesperson. Quote, a year ago, we had no Western air defense systems at medium range at all. We received the first NASAMS and IRIS only last autumn. Today we have such a variety of air defense equipment which might not be found in any other country, he said on national TV. According to the official, air defense systems provided by the West complement Soviet-era models in Ukraine's arsenal, such as the S-300 and the Buk. So that will depend, though, on Russia's stockpiles of these, and you can see that they are using an awful lot of Shahed drones at the moment. Can they receive a consistent supply from Iran? Are they going to get their own indigenous facilities up and running to build those themselves? And just finally here we have as H.I. Sutton says, who normally comments on naval stuff, how it started, how it's going. German World War II Flaktürme, flak towers, and Russian Panzer towers going up around Moscow due to Ukraine's drone threats. So we're starting to see stuff that was last seen in World War II, really, these flak towers to help defend against aerial threats. So that's in Russia, in Moscow area, and here we have Germany. I thought, when I first saw that image, I thought I was looking at a still from Return of the Jedi, but there you go. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Sorry, my voice has gone nuts today. Hey, that's life. Take care. Speak soon.